We had another long day at the center. When I came into the kitchen to make spaghetti that evening, there was a stool by the stove. It was like everything else Cecile brought into her green stucco house. Secondhand. Still, it was unexpected, and I welcomed it. I normally stood by the stove quietly while the food cooked. My feet always ached, but I never complained. Instead, I shifted my weight from one foot to the other and learned to make quick cooking meals. Cecile had allowed me inside her kitchen. She let me cook dinner, wash dishes, and clean up after myself. But she didn't really want me in there with her. She didn't want me stretching my neck over her way, ripping open the piece with any talking. The stool made things different. It was an invitation for me to sit down and be there. Not talk, just cook. Be. As the spaghetti boiled, pictures flashed in and out of my mind. Flashes of sitting with Cecile and being quiet. It was a welcome that had brought me back. That I'd sat with her before and it was all right. Not in this kitchen, but in the kitchen in Brooklyn. Back when Sarah Vaughan filled the house with her smoky voice, Ronetta was far away crying to be picked up, and Cecile's stomach was big with Fern. I wouldn't be exaggerating if I said I was born knowing what to do when I sat with Cecile. Don't cry. Stay quiet. Want nothing. I could talk, but I'd learned that as long as I was quiet, I was allowed to stay with her while she tapped against the wall with her pencil, wrote, and said her rhymes over and over. Don't cry. Stay quiet. Want nothing. Then Fern had come, and days later Cecile left. Big Ma had moved in and told Pa, "That gal's dumb as a dry pump," meaning me. Cecile wouldn't have minded if I'd have been born deaf and mute, but Cecile was gone. Big Ma was another story. I quickly learned to speak up around Big Ma. After we ate our spaghetti, I washed the dishes and wiped the sink down. Cecile said, "I'd let you help me if your hands were clean." My hands were already clean. I just finished washing dishes. But I soaped them with dishwashing liquid, then rinsed and dried them. "Stand over here." I stood where she told me. For a long while, that was all she said, that I stand right there. I looked down on a flat frame with wooden blocks. On the wooden blocks were metal letters facing backward. Backward? They spelled out words line by line. But you'd have to be able to read backward to read the lines. I wanted to be able to read them. On the counter next to the printing machine was a newly inked sheet of paper with words printed in the right direction. Movable type. Push here, I move. There. Push there, I move. 2 squares over, by those squares, from under my feet I land on the free square. Raise my rent. I, Pika Elite, courier, sans serif, pack light, leave swift. I'm that type. I move. Nzila. She took the sheet and hung it up to dry. "I'm going to press down and roll the crank," she said. I figured I would catch on. She turned the lever on the side of the printing machine. Her weight pressed into the machine and down on the metal and paper. The roller spun slowly. The paper pushed its way out onto the tray of backward letters. When the paper was fully inked, I believe she was pleased. Not that she was smiling or jolly or singing. But she liked what she'd done. She studied her printed sheet and held it up to the light. The poem in black ink. Her name, Nzila, in special-shaped letters. Large, curved, lovely, and green. I thought about Cecile's poem. I figured it was about how she was the type to not be still. But I believe she liked this green stucco house. I think she liked being in this kitchen, mothering and praying over this big machine and these blocks of backward letters. This was Cecile being happy. "See this here?" I must have made a move like I was going to touch it. Cecile spoke sharply. "I said see, not touch. See." I nodded and put my hands behind my back. I was used to busy hands. To doing. I did what she said. I looked. "Those are the rollers. You feed the paper through the rollers. You feed it even. If it's crooked, it's a waste of paper. You crank it steady or it's a waste of paper. Waste of ink." I watched her feed the paper between the rollers and turn the crank. Each time the ink spread evenly on the paper. She hung each sheet to dry. "Go ahead." She pointed to the paper and the rollers and the crank. I almost didn't move. Come on, let's see if you can follow directions. I took a sheet from the paper stack and held it from end to end so it would go in even. No matter how much I told myself to keep steady, my hands made the paper shake. I was mad at my own hands. I didn't want Cecile to think I was afraid of doing wrong, but I was. I didn't look up at her to see if I had done right in her eyes. I just did what she said and turned the crank slow, hard, and steady until the paper came out on the other side, I hoped, fully inked. She held up my newly printed sheet and pointed to a spot on the N in Inzila that missed the rollers. She shook her head. A waste of paper. San Francisco treat. Cecile didn't care where we went or what we did on Saturdays and Sundays, as long as we stayed far away from her peace and quiet. Our first weekend, we had played Go Fish and tic-tac-toe in our room and waited for Cecile to announce that we were going to some adventurous place that existed only in California. By the second weekend, I knew we had to have a plan. Since the sun rose high that Saturday, I figured it was a good day to go to the beach and collect seashells for souvenirs. Vonetta, Fern, and I had put on our bathing suits and sunglasses, and I'd asked Cecile to take us to the beach. I had never spoken Martian to someone and had them give me the look that could only be given to a Martian. Instead of answering our question, Cecile gave us a look that said, "Who are you and what planet did y'all come from?" I ended up taking my sisters to the city pool, where we swam and splashed around without thinking about all that chlorine water knotting up our hair. When we'd come back to her house smelling like chlorine, I asked Cecile if I could use her hot comb to press our hair, seeing how naughty it got. I'd expected she'd say no outright because I'd smoke up her precious workplace with hair burning from the hot comb. In fact, I'd expected a no followed by an "I didn't send for y'all in the first place." It hadn't occurred to me that Cecile didn't own a hot comb or curling iron, even though that fact was as big and thick as her unpressed braids. She'd said, "Naughty? Your hair ain't naughty. It ain't misbehaving. It's doing what God meant it to do." That would have been news to Big Ma. We never entered the house of God without our hair pressed and smelling of Dixie Peach hair grease. For our third Saturday in Oakland, I had a better plan. I told my sisters, "We're going on an excursion." Miss Merriam-Webster would have been proud. Excursion. To Vonetta's and Fern's uncomprehending faces, I said, "We're taking a bus ride to our own adventure." It didn't make sense to fly 3,000 miles to the land of Mickey Mouse, movie stars, and all-year sun and not see anything but Black Panthers, police cars, and poor black people. I wasn't foolish enough to set out for Hollywood, Disneyland, or the beach where they filmed Happening 68 with rock and rollers like Paul Revere and the Raiders. Instead, I planned that we would spend our nearly last Saturday in California traveling across the bay to San Francisco to ride a cable car and see Chinatown, Fisherman's Wharf, and the Golden Gate Bridge. Now that was an excursion worthy of a back-to-school essay. Even if we didn't have a camera to take pictures of us on our adventure, we would know we'd been there. I told my sisters, "Don't say a word. Just let me do all the talking." Even though I knew Cecile didn't care, I didn't want her to suddenly take an interest in us and ask a lot of questions. If she asked questions, I'd have to spin a lot of straw, and I couldn't spin a lot of straw and look her in the face the way I'd like to. Like I'm 11 going on 12, and I know what I'm doing. "Cecile, we need money. I have all-day activities planned, and we have to eat while we're out doing our activities." "Yeah, gotta eat." I turned to Fern. "Don't say no more, Fern." She got it. "If I pour cereal for them before we go," I said, "I'll only need change for the bus and some lunch money and a little extra if you want us gone long." Cecile almost raised an eyebrow, but not quite. She figured we were up to something, but probably didn't want to know the details. She reached into her man's pants and poured a lot of nickels, dimes, pennies, and some quarters into my hands. I needed both hands to get every coin. She dealt out 11 single dollars from a wad of bills and gave me those also. I was so giddy about having all of that money, I just dumped it in my shoulder bag. I could sort it out later. Just by the weight of the silver and copper, I knew we had more than the $15 I counted on us getting. I ate my cereal and washed the dishes with my shoulder bag slung around my neck, Brooklyn style. The best way to lose your money is to hold your bag off the shoulder. But this way, with the bag slung crosswise, you were ready for anything. As we were walking out the door, excited about our excursion, Cecile called out, I'm not coming down to no police station if you're out there stealing. Y'all have to spend the night in jail. That was as good a be safe and have a good time as we were going to get from Cecile. We took it and left. Outside, the yards and streets were filled with screaming kids playing. It was all I could do to keep Vonetta and Fern in line for my fully planned excursion. I'd worked too hard writing everything down to have them not want to go. I'd asked Sister Pat about the bus and cable car. I'd gotten all the sightseeing information from the library. I wasn't about to let a kickball game and some Barbie tea parties throw mile-long pouts on Vonetta and Fern because they wanted to stay here in Blackpool, Oakland. Then the worst possible thing happened. Hirohito came rambling up to us on his homemade go-kart. He skidded to a stop using his high-top sneakers, right at Vonetta's feet. She squealed and laughed and said, "What you know, Hirohito?" That was some cute thing she and Janice Angton came up with. I was sick of hearing it. "Delphine, want to watch me fly down that hill?" "No," I said, while my sisters screamed, "Yes!" I glanced at my Timex. "Don't stand there watching Hirohito on his go-kart," it said. "The East Bay bus leaves in 12 minutes. You don't have time for that." Vonetta and Fern folded their arms and wouldn't budge. They watched Hirohito do that run and flop onto the flying T and go bumpity-bump down the hill. When he neared the end of the hill, he dragged his sneakers like Fred Flintstone and came to a full stop. Then he jumped up and turned to us, waving. Vonetta and Fern waved back. "Let's see him do it again," Vonetta said. "It's a boy going down the hill," I said. "We've seen it already. Let's go." I couldn't say it was thrilling. How he jumped on that board thing and rolled down the hill, twisting the T left and right and then swerving it around. I couldn't say how I admired him for not crying about his father being in prison and for trying to be a normal kid. If you wanted to call Hirohito Woods normal. I certainly didn't want Vonetta to get the wrong idea and think I was as stuck on Hirohito as she and Janice were. Because I wasn't. He was just a boy, and I didn't want to miss the bus to our adventure. Our bus pushed out of poor and black Oakland, where lines formed for free breakfasts and men stood around because there were no jobs and too much liquor. We were glad to be going. Each of us looked out and off into different directions, taking in all that we could. Finally, we were on our way to an adventure. I watched Fern, glued to the bus window and singing to herself. I wondered if she missed Miss Pattycake at all. How she loved Miss Pattycake long before she could walk. She teethed on Miss Pattycake's arms and legs, ate her hair when she didn't know better, squeezed her, slept with her, fed her, and sang to her. 7 years of loving Miss Pattycake, and now not one mention of her. I can study every move Fern makes and still not completely know her. There are just things I don't understand about her the way I understand Vonetta. After Miss Pattycake had been damaged and put away, I slept lightly, expecting Fern to awaken during the night, missing her true love. Not that I wanted Fern to be heartbroken. I didn't want her to love someone all her life and then not love or want them at all. Even if her someone was a doll. That was no way to be. I wanted to say something to Fern, but then she cupped her hand around her mouth and squealed and oh, like she'd seen something bad, like a naked lady running down the street. It was that kind of an ooh squeal. "What, Fern?" Her eyes stayed big, her hand over her mouth. Vonetta and I kept going. "What, Fern? What, Fern?" She swallowed a gulp of air and uncupped her mouth. "I saw something." She said it again, and had gone from agog to being pleased with herself. "I saw something." She clapped to the beat. Clap, 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 clap. No matter how much we asked, Fern shook her head no, clapped her hands, and sang her song. "I saw something." Fern was pleased she had seen something. Vonetta was sure she hadn't seen a thing. And I remembered he had said Delphine. "Delphine, want to watch me fly down that hill?"